I should have died 10 years ago. I have a murderer to thank for my life.
When I was 13 and an idiot, like most 13-year-olds are, I spent a lot of time on a now-defunct app called Chatterboxxx. It operated a lot like a more clunky version of Discord where you could chat with strangers online either through community groups or private messages. For context, I should mention that I was a bit of a troubled teenager. I grew up in a dysfunctional household with largely absent parents, and I was bullied pretty severely all throughout middle school. I found solace in one particular Chatterboxxx community called TeensXFashion, which, as I'm sure you can guess, was a place to discuss fashion and aesthetic trends of the mid-2010s. It was supposed to be a place for people aged 13-18, but now that I'm older and wiser, I'm pretty sure that 90% of the people I met on that server were much older guys. Through the server, I met a 17-year-old guy named Jack. I don't remember his Chatterboxxx username, but I remember him being a kind and charismatic presence in our community. We talked almost every day for 2 years, and he quickly became my #1 confidant. From the time I entered high school at age 14, the bullying got worse, as did my home situation, and though I was never diagnosed by a professional, I'm pretty sure I was depressed. I began having some suicidal thoughts, and when I told Jack about them, he seemed sympathetic. I don't blame you. This world is such a shit show. I think about ending things sometimes too. I was pleased that he, unlike my school guidance counselor and the few other people I told about my thoughts, didn't just brush them off and promise me things would get better. I found myself oddly charmed by his candidness. "You're still pretty young," he texted me once. "Maybe wait a year or so. Give life another try. If it hasn't gotten any better by then, let's talk some more." I took his advice and waited for things to get better, but I saw no light at the end of the tunnel. By the time I was 15, I dropped out of high school. I barely left my room, and I was having trouble performing basic tasks like brushing my teeth. When I told Jack about my state, he said, "Honestly, I haven't been doing well either. I bought some cyanide pills a few months back, just waiting for the right time." I was surprised to hear this. Jack had always seemed like a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. After thinking about what he said for a few weeks, and doing some research on the pills he mentioned, I asked if I could buy a few off of him, just in case, and he agreed. I suggested he ship them to me, but after some discussion, I was shocked to learn that we both lived in the same state. I didn't want to give him my home address, the only intelligent thought I had throughout this whole ordeal, and so we agreed to meet in a public place, a coffee shop about an hour away from where I lived. A few weeks later, our agreed-upon meeting date rolled around, and I took the bus to the coffee shop. I had the selfies he'd posted to TeensXFashion as reference, but when I entered the shop and looked around, I didn't see anyone who vaguely resembled the pictures. I walked around, figuring he must be late, before I heard someone shout my name from the corner table. I looked at the man who'd called out to me. It had to be Jack. No one else would know my name, but he looked different. He was much taller and heavier than he appeared in the photos, and much older as well. It was difficult to tell what age he was exactly, but he certainly wasn't 19. I walked over and asked his name, and he gave me both the name Jack and his Chatterboxxx handle. He gave me a friendly smile as I sat across from him. He wasn't a bad-looking guy, and he seemed to have put a lot of effort into his appearance for our meeting, but I was thrown off by the discrepancy in how old he was supposed to be and how old he appeared. Before we'd said much to one another, a barista came over to take our order, which in retrospect was unusual for a coffee shop. The barista's name was Lydia, and she was this petite blonde lady, probably 21 at most. She took our order and then left us to a very awkward, stilted conversation. I didn't know what to say. I'd been excited to meet my friend of 2 years, but now that I was actually there, it all felt like too much. I was so quiet that Jack seemed to take offense. After a while, "Hey," he said at one point. I hadn't even realized I was averting my eyes from his, but when I looked up at him, he was giving me this weird, almost pitiful look. "You're mad because I gained weight, aren't you? You think I'm ugly." I was taken aback. "No," I said. "I don't think you're ugly at all." He seemed genuinely upset. All of a sudden, I felt like a terrible person, like I was taking advantage of him or something. I rushed to console him, partially because I was worried that he wouldn't give me the pills, but also because he was pretty much the only friend I had, and I was terrified of ruining things. Soon, I was the one leading the conversation, pulling him back out of his shell little by little. It was all very odd. The barista came back after a while. I said thank you as she put our drinks down, but she didn't leave afterwards. She just kept standing there, looking at us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "All good here, folks?" Lydia asked, staring directly at me. I told her everything was great, and then she reluctantly returned to the counter. Jack and I finished our drinks, largely in silence. I remember very strongly not wanting to look directly at his face. Like I said, he wasn't a bad-looking guy, but his eyes seemed unnaturally dull, like the light wasn't hitting them right or something. Once we'd finished drinking, and Jack still hadn't made any mention of the pills, I broached the topic myself. "They're in my car," he said, in response to my inquiry. He leaned his face close to mine and lowered his voice, giving me a wink that was anything but charming. "We might both get in trouble if I handed you a bag of pills in a public space like this." I guessed that made sense, so we tossed our drinks, and I followed him outside. The parking lot was full of people, not exactly a prime location for a child abduction, so I didn't have any second thoughts about walking with him. But when we reached the last row of cars and Jack kept going, I slowed down. "Oh, I'm parked a ways down the road," he said. When I asked where he was going, he gave a condescending little laugh, like I'd asked him a stupid question. "Again, I can't be handing you cyanide pills in front of everyone. Silly." Stopped walking. I was starting to think that I didn't know this person as well as I'd thought, and I certainly didn't want to be alone with him in an isolated area. But then again, did I even care? What happened to me? Wasn't I ready to go anyways? Jack noticed that I'd stopped. He turned around and walked back over to me, placing a meaty, sweaty hand on my shoulder. Even in the direct sunlight, his eyes looked strangely dark. "Come on now," he said gruffly and started guiding me further from the parking lot. It was then that I realized that, despite all my misgivings about the world, I really did still care what happened to me. I didn't want to be hurt. I didn't want to die. I raised an arm and tried to push Jack's hand off my shoulder, but he tightened his grip so hard, I thought he was about to break a bone. I thought I was done for before a shout from behind us startled us both. "Hey! Stop right now." I turned my head towards the parking lot and saw the barista from earlier running towards us at full speed. "You stop right there. Now?" This woman was maybe 4'11", and I'm pretty sure Jack could have picked her up and thrown her like a football if he wanted to. But her voice was loud and strong, and as she yelled out, she attracted a lot of attention. As soon as he realized we'd been spotted, he let go of my shoulder and made a run for it. Lydia came to a stop next to me, taking my hand and gently guiding me back towards the group of witnesses in the parking lot. Once we'd made it to safety, she called the police, who arrived quickly to take our statements. However, after listening to my whole story, they ended up taking me to the station for questioning. Lydia came along with me, which made me feel a lot better. To make a long story short, the man I'd met up with was not a 19-year-old named Jack, but a 38-year-old named John Davis Harrison, who the police were able to identify from photos Lydia had taken at the coffee shop. He was arrested the following day after police found the skeletal remains of 2 women and 1 man stuffed between the mattress and the box springs of his bed. Harrison admitted to luring his victims, all of whom had confided their suicidal thoughts in him, with the promise of a quick death via cyanide pills. In reality, the slow, painful deaths his victims endured at his hands were etched into their bones. The whole ordeal was the wake-up call of the century for me. In the aftermath, I went back to high school and started to really apply myself in class. I graduated a year late, but I also graduated with really high marks. I started seeing an awesome therapist at age 16, and thanks to him and a few counselors at my school, I transitioned into a foster family that is now my adoptive family. I actually enjoy living these days, and despite the title of this post, I have not a murderer, but one brave barista to thank for my life now. We still keep in touch, and I'm happy to report that she's doing well too. Thanks, Lydia, for looking out for a clueless kid who didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Now that I'm older and wiser, I promise to do the same. So guys, you heard the story was happy, but not very horror type, even though it's in spooky shits. But there is definitely a very sad story out there. So go check the video above, or I'll steal your credit card.